The smell of sunscreen and potato salad has a way of making everything feel normal, even when it isn't. That's what I remember most about that 4th of July. My stepmother had strung little paper flags along the back fence, and my dad was at the grill in his faded Oregon Ducks apron. And for about 40 minutes, I let myself believe we were just a regular family having a regular cookout. I was 29. I should have known better. My grandmother, we called her Gram, was sitting in the good lawn chair, the one with the thick cushion that we only ever brought out for her. She was 81 and had bad knees and strong opinions about everything, and I loved her more than I have ever loved anyone in that house. She had driven 3 hours from Medford to be there, which meant she'd left before 6 in the morning, which meant this visit mattered to her. I noticed she'd brought her good purse, the tan leather one she kept for church and court dates. I was the one who'd helped her out of the car when she arrived. My stepmother. I'll call her Vanessa because that's her name and she's earned every letter of it, was inside finishing the potato salad. So it was just me and Gram on the driveway, her squeezing my hand with both of hers and saying, "You look thin, sweetheart. Are you eating?" I told her I was fine. I was an estate planning paralegal at a firm in Portland. I had my own apartment, my own car, a 401k I was actually contributing to. I was fine. "I know you are," she said. "That's not what I asked." That was Gram. My dad had remarried when I was 11. Vanessa came with 2 kids of her own, a son named Brody, who was 2 years older than me, and a daughter named Melissa, who was 4 years younger. My dad adopted them formally about a year after the wedding, so on paper we were siblings. In practice, we were strangers who shared a refrigerator. Brody ignored me. Melissa was kind enough, but had learned early to take her cues from her mother. And her mother had made it clear, in the careful way that adults make things clear to children without saying them out loud, that I was an inconvenience that came with the husband. I was my dad's daughter from his first marriage. My mother died when I was 7. Breast cancer, fast and terrible. After she was gone, it was just me and my dad in the house on Sycamore Street. And then it was me and my dad and Vanessa, and then it was me and my dad and Vanessa, and Brody and Melissa, and somewhere in that process, I became a guest in my own life. I don't want to make my dad sound like a villain. He's not. He's weak in the specific way that some men are weak, where they love their children genuinely but cannot withstand the sustained displeasure of a spouse. Vanessa never screamed at me. She never did anything you could point to. She just had this way of making my presence feel like a problem to be managed, and my dad had spent 18 years managing it by not noticing. Anyway, the cookout. Gram waited until after lunch to do it. We'd all finished eating, and Brody had gone back for a 3rd helping of brisket, and Melissa was scrolling her phone, and my dad was telling some story about a fishing trip, and Gram set down her iced tea and reached into that good tan purse and pulled out envelopes. 3 of them. She'd written our names on the front in her handwriting, which had gotten shaky in the last few years but was still unmistakably hers. Loopy and deliberate. She handed Brody his, then Melissa hers. Then she held mine out to me across the picnic table, and she looked at me in a way that I can only describe as on purpose. Like she was making sure I understood this was intentional. "For your futures," she said. I opened mine carefully. Inside was a cashier's check for $15,000, made out to my name, drawn on her credit union in Medford. I sat there holding it, and I didn't know what to say. $15,000. I made decent money, but I had student loans and Portland rent, and I'd been quietly stressed about money in the way that you get quietly stressed when you're too proud to mention it to anyone. $15,000 felt like being able to breathe. "Mom," my dad started, sounding almost nervous. "You didn't have to." "I know I didn't have to," Gram said. "I wanted to. It's my money, and I'm still alive enough to give it to whoever I please." Vanessa had been quiet. That was the version of Vanessa I'd learned to fear more than the talking version. She was looking at the check in Brody's hand with an expression I couldn't quite read. Then she said, casually, "The way you'd mentioned the weather, sweetheart, that account's been closed." Gram looked at her. "Which account?" "Your old credit union account. Don't you remember? You moved everything to First Federal 2 years ago when they changed their fee structure. I helped you with the paperwork." Vanessa's voice was patient and kind, the way a preschool teacher is patient and kind. "These checks won't clear. The account they're drawn on doesn't exist anymore. Graham frowned. She reached back into her purse and found her reading glasses and put them on and looked at the check she'd kept for herself, the one she'd written the amounts from. I don't think that's right, she said slowly. Mom, Vanessa said, and the way she said it, gentle and certain and faintly pitying. I have heard that tone used on elderly people, and I have watched it work like a key in a lock. I was there. You closed it. These will just bounce. It would be embarrassing at the bank. I watched my grandmother's face do something I'd never seen it do. She faltered. This woman who had raised 4 kids after my grandfather walked out, who had worked the register at a grocery store for 22 years, who had driven herself to every chemotherapy appointment without asking anyone for a ride, she faltered. Just for a second. But I saw it. Brody shrugged and said, "So what do we do with these?" and started tearing his in half. Melissa looked at her mother, then at the check in her hand, and then she tore hers too. I didn't tear mine. I folded it once, carefully, along the existing crease, and I put it back in the envelope, and I put the envelope in the pocket of my shorts. My heart was beating very fast. Vanessa looked at me. "Honey," she said, "it's just paper." "I know," I said. "I'll keep it anyway." She smiled. It was a perfectly pleasant smile. Of course, my dad had not said a single word do any of this. I work in estate planning. I have worked in estate planning for 6 years. My job, in plain terms, is to make sure that when people die, their wishes are carried out and their assets go where they intended. I spend my days reading wills, reviewing trust documents, flagging discrepancies, and sitting across tables from grieving families who are sometimes surprised to learn what their loved one actually left behind. One thing I know with certainty, with the kind of certainty that lives in your bones after 6 years, a cashier's check does not come from a personal checking account. A cashier's check is a check issued by the bank itself. The funds are withdrawn from your account at the moment of purchase. The check is then a liability of the bank, guaranteed by the bank, completely independent of whatever happens to your personal account afterward. You could close every account you've ever had the next day. You could withdraw everything, move to another state, change your name. The cashier's check would still be good. The bank issued it. The bank is on the hook for it. Vanessa either knew this and was lying or didn't know this and was wrong. Either way, the check in my pocket was real. I drove home from that cookout on autopilot. I kept going over it in my head, the timing, the confidence, the way she'd looked at me when I didn't tear mine. Brody and Melissa hadn't hesitated. They'd watched their mother and followed. My dad had watched his wife and said nothing. Only Graham seemed uncertain. And I think that uncertainty was planted there deliberately, because a person who is uncertain does not make calls to her credit union. I called my office the next morning and spoke to one of the attorneys I work with. I described what had happened: a cashier's check, alleged closed account, request to verify. He said what I already knew: bring it to any branch of the issuing institution. A cashier's check is valid as long as it hasn't been canceled by the issuer, and canceling a cashier's check is not something that happens by accident. It requires a formal process, an affidavit of loss, sometimes a court order. I drove down to Medford that Saturday. Graham's credit union was a small place on a tree-lined street, the kind of financial institution that still has a dish of wrapped candies at the teller window. I walked in on a Saturday morning, and the woman who helped me was maybe 50, with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and she looked at the check and typed some things and said, "This is perfectly valid." "The account it's drawn from," I said. "Is it still open?" She looked at her screen. "The check isn't drawn from a personal account," she said, a little confused, like I should know this. "It's a cashier's check. It's drawn on the credit union's operating account. That account isn't going anywhere." She processed the deposit. The funds were available the next business day. I sat in the parking lot for a long time after that, not celebrating, thinking, because here's the thing about knowing how the system works. When someone lies to you about it, you start asking why. And the more I thought about Vanessa's certainty, not just confidence, certainty, the kind of certainty that doesn't leave room for questions, the more I thought about all the other things she had managed. Vanessa managed the household finances. She had managed them since before I was old enough to pay attention. She did the grocery budget, The property taxes, the insurance. My dad handed over his paycheck and she handled the details because that's what she was good at, and he was not. And that had been the arrangement since the beginning. My grandmother had updated her estate documents 3 years ago. I knew this because she'd mentioned it at Christmas. She'd seen an attorney and gotten her will redone and set up a small trust. She'd said it almost offhandedly, the way you mention you got the car serviced. Taken care of. I had never seen those documents. I called Graham that Sunday and I asked, gently, if I could come back down. I said I wanted to talk through some things. She said yes immediately without asking why. And when I got to her house, she had coffee made and cookies on the table, and she looked at me like she'd been waiting. "The check cleared?" I said. She set down her mug. "Of course it did," she said quietly. "I bought it with my own money." I know. She told me it was closed. She was wrong, I said, and then, carefully, or she wasn't. Graham was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What do you need to see?" Her estate documents were in a file folder in her bedroom closet, tucked between a box of photographs and an old electric blanket. She'd organized them herself, which was a small mercy. They were dated, labeled, in order. The will was straightforward. Her house, her personal property, divided 3 ways among her 4 grandchildren, Brody, Melissa, and me. Her son from her first marriage, my uncle, had been removed from the document after some falling out years ago. 3 ways? Equal shares. The trust was the thing that made me sit down. She had established a revocable living trust 3 years ago with an initial contribution of $80,000, accumulated savings from a lifetime of working. The trust had a named trustee, the attorney who drafted it, and it was supposed to convert to an irrevocable trust on her 75th birthday, at which point the assets would be managed for her benefit during her lifetime and then distributed to her beneficiaries upon her death. Beneficiaries, her 4 grandchildren, equal shares, including me. I read it twice. Then I turned to the account statements she'd kept clipped to the back. The trust had been funded, $80,000 deposited on the date of creation. The statements ran for about a year after that. Regular reports showing the balance, modest interest, the trustee's annual fee deducted. Then the statement stopped. The last one was dated about 2 years ago. The balance at that time was $84,000. I asked Graham when she last received a statement. She thought about it. "They used to come every quarter," she said. "And then for a while they came every 6 months. And then," she stopped. "Vanessa handles my mail when I'm visiting. She set up a forwarding situation when I stayed with them for that stretch after my knee surgery. Maybe they're going there." I asked her if she'd asked for them. "I asked your father once and he said he'd look into it, and I think She looked at her hands. "I trusted them. I borrowed her documents and I drove back to Portland and I called the attorney who drafted the trust first thing Monday morning. His name was on the letterhead. He'd been in practice for 30 years, specialized in elder law, had an office in Medford with a photo of Mount Shasta on his website. I left a message with his assistant and he called me back within the hour. I explained who I was. I explained that I was a paralegal with an estate planning firm, that my grandmother was his client, that I was calling with her knowledge and consent, and that I had some questions about the status of her trust. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I've been hoping someone would call. The trust had been improperly redirected." That's the clinical way to say it. The longer version is this. 2 years ago, someone had filed a change of trustee form with the institution holding the trust assets, removing the original attorney trustee and substituting my father as successor trustee. The form had my grandmother's signature on it. Graham, when I showed her a copy, said she did not remember signing it. She was 81 and her memory had some gaps, and I want to be honest about that. But I also want to be honest about the fact that the signature looked wrong. I had seen her signature on 100 cards and letters and checks over my entire life, and the signature on that form was flatter somehow. Less her. Once my father became successor trustee, the trust account was moved from the original institution to a new account at a bank in Portland. Statements were sent to my father's address. Over the course of 18 months, withdrawals had been made, $12,000 here, $20,000 there, labeled in the transaction records as Family Investment Fund and Estate Planning Expenses. and one that simply said, distribution per trustee discretion. A total of $51,000 had been withdrawn. $33,000 remained. I am going to be very honest about what happened inside me when I understood this. I did not cry. I have never been someone who cries easily. What I felt was colder than that. A kind of settling, like pieces clicking into a shape that part of me had always suspected was there. The $15,000 cashier's check, the certainty in Vanessa's voice, the systematic way she'd managed to intercept the statements. The mail forwarding after the knee surgery, my dad's silence at the cookout, his silence at the cookout, his silence across 18 years. I called my grandmother that night and I told her everything, plainly and carefully because she deserved that. She was quiet for a long time. Then, she said, I want to hire an attorney. You already have a good one, I said. He's already been gathering records. He said he can refer us to someone who handles civil litigation. And the police? She said. That's also an option, I said. Financial elder abuse is a crime in Oregon. The DA's office takes it seriously. Good, she said. She sounded like herself again. Entirely herself. Then let's do that. I won't pretend the months that followed were simple. Nothing about this was simple. My dad, when he was confronted, first by the original attorney and then by law enforcement, said he hadn't understood what he was signing, that Vanessa had handled it, that he trusted her. It was the most honest thing he'd said in years, and also the most pathetic. He had handed his mother-in-law's financial future to his wife without reading a document, without asking a question, without ever telling me. Vanessa hired a criminal defense attorney. She was charged with financial elder abuse and theft by deception. The charges moved slowly, the way charges do. I won't have a neat ending to that story for you because the justice system doesn't offer neat endings on a schedule. What I can tell you is that the civil case resulted in a judgment against her for the full amount misappropriated, plus interest. My grandmother's remaining trust assets were secured. The redirected funds were in the process of being recovered. The 3 cashier's checks, the ones she'd said were worthless, had been Graham's way of giving us something she could hand directly to our hands, bypassing whatever account my dad and Vanessa could have touched. I don't know if she suspected something was wrong and was acting on instinct. When I asked her, she said she just wanted us to have something certain. That's the word she used, certain. Brody and Melissa had torn theirs in half at a picnic table in July because their mother told them to. I don't know what they think about that now. I haven't spoken to either of them. I haven't spoken to my father either. Not in the way we used to. We've exchanged some texts. He said he was sorry. I believe he means it. I also believe that sorry, at this point, is like a bucket of water after a house is burned down. It's not nothing, it's just not enough. Graham moved to Portland in September. She's in an independent living community about 12 minutes from my apartment, and I go over twice a week, and we have dinner, and she beats me at cribbage and tells me stories about my mother that I have never heard before. Little ones. The kind that other people would have forgotten by now. She remembers everything about my mother. She's kept her alive in a way that no one else in my life ever bothered to do. I think about the cookout sometimes. The flags on the fence, the smell of brisket, the way Vanessa's voice was so calm and certain when she said the checks were worthless. I think about how close I came to tearing mine. I was holding it over the table. I almost did it just to avoid the look on her face. I'm glad I folded it instead. I'm glad I knew what I knew. And I'm glad that Graham sat in the good lawn chair that day with her good purse in her lap and handed me that envelope across the table and looked at me in that way she has. Deliberate, on purpose, like she was making sure I understood. I understood. I thought a lot about what actually happened at that cookout, not just the surface of it, but the mechanics underneath. Vanessa didn't lie to Graham once at one picnic table on one afternoon. She had been building that lie for years. The mail forwarding after the knee surgery, the change of trustee form, the transaction records labeled Family Investment Fund, like that, was a real thing. Like words on a bank statement make something legitimate. She was methodical in a way that only works when the people around you have decided, somewhere along the line, to stop paying attention. That's the part that stays with me. Not the anger. The anger has faded into something quieter, something more like clarity. What stays is the understanding that the conditions for what happened were created slowly, by a lot of small decisions that nobody made. Loudly. My dad signed things without reading them. Graham trusted people she loved. Brody and Melissa followed their mother's cue without asking a single question. None of those choices felt like choices at the time. They felt like ease. And ease, I've learned, is sometimes just negligence wearing a comfortable face. I think about Graham holding that check, putting her reading glasses on, starting to doubt herself because someone spoke with enough certainty. She raised 4 children. She worked that grocery store register for 22 years. She drove herself to chemotherapy. And in one 90-second conversation at a picnic table, she almost let someone else's confidence override everything she knew. That's not weakness. That's what happens when we love people and want to believe they're acting in good faith. It costs us something, sometimes. It cost Graham $51,000 over 18 months. What I keep coming back to is this: knowledge is not useful if you don't trust it. I knew what a cashier's check was. I knew with total certainty that Vanessa was wrong. But I still almost tore mine. Not because I believed her. I didn't, but because holding on to it meant conflict, and conflict in that family always had a price. What I did in that moment was choose the discomfort of keeping it over the comfort of going along. That decision took about 4 seconds. Those 4 seconds changed everything. I'm not going to tell you that things worked out neatly or that justice arrived on schedule. The legal process is slow and frustrating and exhausting in a way I didn't fully appreciate even working adjacent to it, but Graham's remaining assets are protected. She's 12 minutes from my apartment. She beats me at cribbage twice a week and tells me stories about my mother that nobody else has bothered to keep alive. That's not karma in any cosmic sense. That's just what happens when someone finally decides to pay attention. Really pay attention and doesn't look away when it gets uncomfortable. Vanessa built something on the assumption that no one in that family would ever look closely. She was right about almost everyone. She was wrong about me. And I think, somewhere underneath all of it, Graham knew that. Why else bring the good purse? Why else hand me that envelope across the table and look at me that specific way? Deliberate, certain. Like she was passing something on? She couldn't have known exactly what would follow, but she knew who in that family was paying attention. The check cleared. The documents told the truth. And the only thing I had to do was refuse to throw away something real just because someone told me it was worthless.